Okay, thanks. So Nick is a very famous member of the Canadian business community, serves on three, I think, prominent Canadian boards, and comes from the backwoods of Quebec. So he didn't speak English till he was about 35, I think. Did a great job at university, joined McKinsey, went to the Harvard Business School, had a failed startup, then he had three successful ones, happily became the head of Google Canada and then moved to headquarters where he ended up 7 years, I think it was, Nick, as the ambassador extraordinary for the company. So he's seen, as he says in his book, a thousand different CEOs, I think you said you've seen with your staff. And the book, Be a Sequoia, Not a Bonsai, is a real hands-on how to get this done and how to be successful in your business so you end up as a tall standing 1,000-year-old sequoia and not a tiny little baby bonsai that dies in 10 years. So, Nick, welcome back, and away you go. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Grant. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I see quite a few familiar names, so thanks for joining. Yeah, as David mentioned, I had this extraordinary opportunity, and I feel really privileged to have been Google's chief evangelist. And every single day, people would fly in from all over the world to California. I come to Google's Partnerplex, which is where a CEO sits and where top partners come in to spend a day with us. And I would typically, see two companies a day, spend about an hour with the CEO, the CMO, the CFO, and the more junior folks. And we met, obviously, these are the companies who, invest the most on Google. So these are big Google Cloud customers, big Google Ads customers. So these are, very advanced digital companies. And I left Google now, my goodness, 3 years ago. And I just thought I should write what I learned because I just met so many extraordinary companies. So the book is a summary of what I learned in those 5 years as chief evangelist. And what would typically happen, by the way, is the CEO would sit in front of me and I would start by asking her like, "Hey, look, what's top of mind for you? What are you really thinking about, and how can I be most helpful, to you in the next hour?" And the CEO would talk about, well, look, we want to delight customers more. We want to be, do a digital transformation faster. We want to use AI, better. All of that to improve our profitability in a way that delights customers, right? And so the CEO would almost always talk about profitability. And then I would start asking the CMO and the CFO and the head of product, what are you working on and what's important to you? So guess, you don't have to answer, but guess what percentage of the time when I started digging into what was actually happening, now how companies were investing in Google marketing, for example, or how they were using cloud data, like how often were those folks actually trying to maximize profits? Of course, in an ethical way, right? I'm not talking about, doing things that are untoward, but so what I learned, and this was really shocking to me, is that only about 10% of the time when we dug in and we asked, what are the KPIs for marketing? What are the KPIs for product development? Was there anything at all about profitability? And the CEO was typically quite shocked. And so one of the so what's of the book, and this is really hard to believe, but almost all the time, companies are super busy doing stuff that doesn't really matter that much. And sometimes their KPIs actually send them completely in the wrong direction. And so whenever I saw that, I would try to right size, what the teams were doing and to give them advice on how to think a little bit differently. And so let me just share an example with you. Like imagine you're on the board of a nonprofit, right? And they show you this donations chart. And say, hey, look, we raised $1 million in January and 2 million in February and so on and so forth. And to do this, we invested, $500,000 a month in advertising. And if you look at this dashboard, like the ROI, right, the kind of donations divided by the advertising, it's went up from 2 to 1 to 6 to 1, right? I mean, they're still investing $500,000 in advertising and donations tripled in 4 months. Like, what's not to like, right? I mean, this is amazing. So, but with all of my experience seeing all these dashboards, hundreds and hundreds of them, when I see this, I actually spot a big opportunity. Right. And so this to me actually is bonsai thinking. It's kind of small thinking. Why? Well, the budget is kind of fixed. Like, well, if you're getting $6 for every dollar you invest, you should be doing more, right? So why are you capped at a 500,000? And then why is the ROI? your core KPI. By the way, whenever you see a dashboard like this, you can tell the marketing team is going to try to increase this ROI. They want to be more efficient. They're going to prune a bunch of stuff. They're going to bonsai their way, right? And so here this looks pretty good in the short term. They've gone from 1 million to 3 million, but you can already see, by the way, that that 3 million is kind of starting to get capped. Like they're not going to grow past that. And they're not going to try to grow past that because their advertising budget is fixed and they're trying to increase ROI. And so this is what happened when I met St. Jude's, which is the largest children's hospital in the world, an extraordinary organization, ranked the number one most respected organization in the US, and the number one place that college graduates want to work anywhere in the US. And
Wow.
so St. Jude's, when I met them, my goodness, now 7 years ago, was raising about $1 billion a year, very successfully, amazing, amazing fundraising skills. And almost all of that, 80+% of that $1 billion was raised from small donors who were donating online, right? They would advertise on Facebook, they would advertise on Google. People would see, an ad, click on it, and then donate on their website. And St. Jude's was doing a lot of great things, but part of what they were doing is kind of thinking this way, right? And so I said, well, look, and I met, the senior executives and said, would you be open to thinking a little bit differently? Like, we shouldn't care how much you invest. We shouldn't care what the ROI is. What we should care about is how much you have after you pay us, right? Like, we raised this much, we gave Google back this much in advertising, and here's what's left. Don't you want to maximize the net donations, the donations left after you invested in marketing? Here's your new dashboard, right? Like, hey, like here's how much we raised in January. We raised $20 million after we paid Google and Facebook and all of the different advertising channels that we use. And it's a lot better than last year, right? Which was about 15. And so we're trying to maximize this. Like every single month, we want to push and push and push. And we'll invest less money in advertising if it doesn't make sense. We'll invest a lot more if it does make sense. We want to crank out as many donations as possible so that we can help as many children as possible. So they did a number of other things as well, but they changed their KPI from kind of this ROI, kind of smaller kind of thinking to this net donations, kind of larger kind of thinking. Like we want to maximize it. Their investment in marketing really went up a lot. But what happened is that their donations, after, paying for all this marketing, were up by 46% in 1 year. Right. And if you're raising $1 billion a year, I mean, that's pretty meaningful. And I checked, where they were last year and they raised $2.5 billion. And so it's pretty extraordinary by just kind of changing, a small thing, like just how you think about something from an efficiency, right, strategy. We want to be efficient to a growth strategy. You can see 1 billion turn into $2.5 billion in 5 or 6 years, right? And so the bonsai thinks about pruning, cutting, being efficient. And there's nothing wrong. We don't want people to waste money. But what we want is kind of sequoia thinking, which is, hey, look, not everything is perfect, right? Maybe like the trunk of my tree is split in half and a car can get through it. Some of the branches are a little crooked. But overall, the tree is just unbelievable, right? Like the net donations are very, very high. And I'm probably wasting some money here in marketing here and there, but in the end, I'm just way better off than I was last year. And so, it's kind of hard to believe, by the way, that only 10% of marketers would do something like this. But here's a quote from my good friend Chris, who used to run Google Canada. And this is in the book, right? In my 9 years at Google, I can count on one hand the number of companies who optimize profits. Almost every other marketer optimizes ROI or some other efficiency metric like cost per lead. Why? We've been doing this as marketers for the last 20 years in digital marketing, and it's been ingrained in our skulls to maximize ROI as opposed to profitability, right? And so that's a pretty simple example when it's just, putting cash into Google and Facebook and receiving cash and donations. So that's a pretty easy, mental gymnastics to do, right? You should have as much cash as possible at the end of the day. Now, it gets a lot more complex with more complex businesses. And the more the complexity, the bigger the opportunity. So I'll share with you in a retail example, right? So imagine you're a retailer and you acquire two customers. And traditionally, what you would do is you would send back to Facebook and to Google how much that customer bought, right? Well, this customer bought $100 worth. And then you would ask Google and Facebook to give you a 4-to-1 or a 5-to-1 return. And so that's kind of how everybody, 99% of retailers do it. But if you dig in, right, maybe these two customers are quite different, right? Their two sales are different. One had a 80% margin, one had a 40% margin. Maybe the likelihood of returning something is much higher for customer B because of what they bought and who they are. Maybe the shipping costs are a lot higher. So now you've only got you get $75 left of profit for customer A and only 20 for customer B. And then maybe you can also track the fact that customer A also bought something in store after seeing your ad online and that customer B didn't. So now you've gone from these two customers are the same, they're worth $100 to me, to customer A is worth 7 times more than customer B. Again, only the most sophisticated retailers would share, the data on the right versus the data on the left. And if you share the data on the right, you would be way, way better off. So for example, Pandora, the world's largest jewelry store, started sharing this better data with Google's advertising. And next thing you know, the store revenues went up by 200%, by 200%, right? And so not only are people not putting in the right KPIs into, these machines, these AI machines like Google and Facebook, they're also not sharing the right data, right? And so there's two massive opportunities here, and this is really important to understand in the world of AI, right? In the world of AI, whether it's marketing or product development or customer service, the actual task itself will get more and more automated. Like it's not going to be hard to target marketing or advertising. It's not going to be hard to, figure out what the ads look like. The machine will do all this. But you, as a human, have to tell the machine what you want. Do you want maximum net donations or do you want a high ROI? And you have to give it the right data. Did we make $100 today? Did we make $200 today? Depending on, the margins and the store sales and so on and so forth. And what I saw in my 5 years at Google is that most companies don't tell the AI the right thing to do, and most companies don't give the AI the right data. So if that's what you do, right, AI will drive you in the wrong direction a lot faster, right? And the companies who give AI the right KPIs and the right data were just, outperforming in an extraordinary way, right? And so, I just use a marketing example, but when I was talking to these executives, we talk about marketing first for about half the meeting, and then I said, well, look, if your marketing team, like the most obvious place in your company to maximize profits, right? It's not maximizing profits. What are the odds that your software development team is doing that, right? So if you talk to software developers, their top metric is almost always, shipping features on time. Now, some of the top companies in the world actually can track profit from different features. And so the developers are actually building for profit. Customer service, right? The average handle time. I met a number of companies who actually can track, the impact of each customer service call or customer service interaction on, that customer's, customer lifetime value. So did the customer service agent improve or decline, the customer lifetime value? And so on and so forth, right? Just imagine procurement, delivery, HR, right? Time to hire is a terrible metric because the top 10% of employees are at least 10 times more productive than the average. What you really should track is, the dollars generated for, employees that are just recently got hired. And so it's really critical to rethink, how we think through these metrics. And again, most companies don't do anything like this. And so what's the insight here? The insight is that almost no one inside a typical company is actually trying to maximize profits. They're just busy doing a whole bunch of other stuff. And the CEO is like, hey, what's happening? How come, we're not growing as fast as I want? Turns out when the rubber meets the road and people actually doing the things like building the products, investing in marketing, doing customer service, profits is not even on their radar screen. And so in the book, I go through how to understand this, right? Step-by-step approach on how to identify the problem and how to fix that. Second point I want to make is, okay, so profits are great, but what's even better is kind of longer term profits, not just short-term profits. And so if you look at this is called the whale curve, and this is true for a very high percentage of companies, right? So this is an example here of, if you look at the 10% most profitable customers on the left side, They generate, often more than 100% of the profits, right? Top 20% generate all the profits. And as you get down to the least profitable 30%, right? 70, 80, 90, 100, the profits actually decline. So if you only had a top 20% customers, you'd be twice as profitable. And this could be debated, it's not always true, but for most companies, there's a very high concentration of profits around the top 20% customers. However, when I would ask this question, hey, like CEO, what percentage of your profits come from your top 20% customers? Only a quarter knew it. And then and for those who knew it, I'm like, hey, well, tell me what these customers eat for breakfast. What do they look like? What do they smell like? Like, tell me what you know about these customers because we can find you more on Google. And only about 25% of the CEOs who knew their profit concentration can describe these customers. And so what does that mean? That means that very few companies actually try to acquire the most profitable customers in the industry. They can't even describe them. So I'll share with you a couple of stories. One is Amazon's entry into Canada. I was not involved with this. I don't know exactly what they did, but from the outside looking in, here's what I surmise they did, and it's extraordinarily clever. So imagine, some 20 years ago, Amazon enters Canada. They have no foothold in Canada. They just kind of launch with a fairly small assortment of books. Right. And so I don't know if you know why, David, Amazon launches in a new country with only books. Do you have a sense why?
Yeah, I think that's probably the richest people in the world buy books. They don't buy tennis shoes. So,
Yeah, if you're one of the first people to guess this, I guess I really kind of led the witness on this one, but people
yeah,
who buy lots of books buy lots of
yeah,
everything, right?
yeah.
It's the easiest way to predict your future customer lifetime value, like the cash flow you're going to generate in the next 5 to 10 years. So you launch in Canada, you do a whole bunch of marketing in the wealthiest areas of Canada, and you sell books to these people, and you get a database full of X percent of Canadians who have Y percent of the wealth in Canada, and then you launch all of your products, right? And these people that you already have in your database start just buying more products, and then you wait a couple of years, and once you have a big enough database, you launch Amazon Prime and you lock them in. Right. And so your goal is to make sure people never search on Google ever again. They go right to Amazon. And
Yep.
in the meantime, by the way, other retailers who don't really look at customer lifetime value, they just look at financial results every day. Like here's our sales, here's our turnover, right? Here's our inventory turnover, here's our margin. But I don't know that I just lost David Beatty as a customer because he used to buy from me every 2 weeks, and I haven't seen him in 3 months. But I don't even look at this. I don't even look at this data, right? I don't look at customer data. I just look at financial data. So I have no idea that Amazon is picking off my best customers because I can't feel it yet, right? Like it hasn't hurt me badly yet. But man, am I going to feel it in the next 2 years, right?
Yep.
So talk about an amazing, entry strategy. And here's another example. I work with a car insurance company in Canada. This is in the book, right? And so they would typically look at, the acquisition of new customers, and they would look at leads, right? A number of people would fill out a form that they want to become, a car insurance customer. And like, hey, look, our number of leads is going up every day, and our
Yeah.
cost per lead is going down. Like we're amazing. Well, yeah, but if you look at the quality of these leads, right, these people are actually, not going to turn into paying customers. And then if they do, maybe they're not going to stick around for a long time, and maybe they're going to crash their car. And next thing you know, you're going to lose money. So this extraordinary company built a forecasting model to predict the future. And what the model did is predict. Now, each brand new customer they'd never seen before, right? You're David Beatty, you come into this website, you enter, fill out a few forms, and based on, data they can use legally, right? Your gender, your age, your credit score, where you live, the car you drive, your driving history, and so on and so forth, they can predict the likelihood you're going to crash your car. And by the way, using AI, you can actually double the accuracy of that prediction compared to what humans were able to do before. So they can predict, the likelihood you're going to crash your car. They can predict how long you're going to stay as a customer. They can predict the likelihood you're not going to pay, right, and default. And they were able to score each customer from 1 to 10, right? And then you would send this data back to Google and Facebook and say, hey, look, this is a 1. Like Nick is a 1. He's a terrible customer. Don't send me more customers like that. And David Beatty is a 10. Please send me more customers like that. And within a few months, something extraordinary happened. Um, they got 90% more of the top customers, right, and they rated 9 or 10, and they got 60% fewer of the least profitable customers rated 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Basically, Google and Facebook stopped showing their ads to bad drivers, right? And this company's profit quadrupled within a year. And
Mm.
so the so what here is that if only 10% of companies optimize profits um, in marketing and across the rest of the organization, fewer than 1% of companies I've ever worked with have a strategy to acquire the most valuable customers in their industry. And the ones who do, as you can imagine, acquire a lot of them, right? And are very, very hard to beat. And so in the book, we talk about how to do this because it's people actually don't really, I think, understand this. Like how do you predict the value of a brand new customer you've never seen before? So there's real, ways to do this using AI and using data. And then how do you connect that with your marketing so that you're acquiring those really valuable customers? So that's an extraordinarily powerful way to grow a business by just cherry picking the cream off the top, right? You're the one who gets a disproportionate number of the top customers and you leave the bottom, 30, 40% customers to your competitors. Um, Couple more ideas. So we talked about, acquiring the most valuable customers. And by the way, most customers that you acquire, you can certainly improve the customer lifetime value. You can make them worth more over time by doing a bunch of things, right? Cross-selling, upselling, so on and so forth. But it's a lot harder to do than acquiring customers in the first place. What I mean is that the typical customer that you acquire, like how much money they'll give you over time is typically baked in a lot from day one, right? I mean, like, you know, if you acquire me in e-commerce, I just do a lot of e-commerce shopping. If you acquire my mom, right, doesn't do a lot of e-commerce shopping, she'll probably buy once and never buy again. And so we can certainly work on improving the value of existing customers, but acquiring very valuable customers is way more powerful. It's just the opposite of what we've been told from the beginning, which is always like retaining customers is easier, it's less expensive, we should focus on loyalty. Loyalty is great, but really the key leverage here is acquiring the best customers. But having said
Mm.
that, right, and so you could certainly do things to increase the customer lifetime value again, which is the future cash flow of an individual customer. But most companies do it wrong, right? They spend too much time trying to make their best customers better. And it's really hard to take a top 10% customer and double their spend, right? So here you're really trying to retain, you're trying to grow these customers, but you really want to retain them. The next 20% are actually really ripe for increase. They can be much, much more profitable relatively easily. And then here, the last, 70%, we spend so much time trying to reduce churn. We're trying to spend so much time trying to bring customers back. It is very, very hard to do, and it should be mostly done through automated systems. And so that sweet spot of 70th to 90th percentile is where most companies should put in their efforts. There's a lot of data about this, a lot of studies that have been done, but most companies actually don't do that. They do a bunch of other things. So I'll just give you a few examples. I was working with a fashion retailer. They had built an amazing website. They had built an amazing AI recommendation agent. And so the recommendation engine would recommend things that are similar to what you've already bought, right? If you bought, and this is mostly for women, right? If you bought a whole bunch of skirts, you like skirts, so you would go back to the site and the site would recommend more skirts. Nothing wrong with that, right? Well, the most experienced merchant came to us and said, look, I don't think that's right. I think that what we should do is try to get people to shop across categories. Because in my experience, if a woman is shopping across only skirts, and next thing you know, she's buying shoes or she's buying, tops, then she's much more likely to buy more over time. It may be a little harder to sell her, something that's off category, but once we do, she's going to be worth a lot more. And so we actually tried this manually. We did a whole bunch of tests, and we showed that if you can get a woman to shop across multiple categories, she's worth twice as much as before. The AI
Mm.
was wrong, right? And so we actually retooled the AI to not just sell what the person already bought, to sell some of that, but also sell things that are quite different so that we would try to get people to shop across categories. So Imagine doubling the customer lifetime value of a customer through one test, right? So that was amazing. Target announced about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, that customers who shop online and in store are 10 times more valuable. They,
Wow.
yeah, they couldn't tell this before because the databases didn't talk to each other. There was no like unique customer journey. There was the online store, there was the department stores. But now, if you knew this, right? I mean, imagine what you would do to get an online shopper to go into the store for the first time, even though it's more expensive for you in many ways, right? So that's interesting. Zappos did one of the least obvious things to improve customer lifetime value. They looked through their data and he discovered that the most valuable customers they had after all the cost to serve, not just from a margin perspective, but from a margin minus cost to serve, the most valuable customers were customers who returned shoes the most often.
Ha!
Yeah, so like, why? Oh, because customers like that would take a $400 or $500 pair of shoes, order five, the size, the right, and then keep one and send the other four back. So they made their returns a lot easier. They made them free. You can return for up to a year. It was very, very expensive, and it hurt profits in the short term. But in the long term, it helped them win the whole category. And then one last one. This is another retailer in Europe. Again, very counterintuitive. They found that by far the most valuable customers were the ones who were financing their purchases as opposed to paying up front with their credit card. You would think that's the opposite, right? And so they made financing a lot easier and they were able to get more of these high value customers. And so, right? So the insight here is so insight number one was nobody is actually working on profits. Insight number two was nobody is trying to acquire the most profitable customers. Insight number three is yes, most companies have, systems to try and improve, the value of existing customers, right? They'll email customers, they'll do a bunch of stuff. But only 10% of companies I've worked with had a dedicated strategy to increase the customer lifetime value of those 70 to 90% customers and just really understood what worked as opposed to just, sending emails to help customers buy more. And the best companies do like dramatic things like Amazon Prime in order to lock customers in. And really, really, like if you're an Amazon Prime customer, you were 3x a non-Prime customer, right?
And what's the difference of an Amazon Prime versus just buying on Amazon, Nick? What do they do for me?
Well, if you Amazon Prime, you pay up front, right? It's $225 in the US. I don't know how much it is in Canada. And you get, in the US, you get same day or next day delivery on almost everything. And
Yeah.
Amazon loses their shirt on this stuff, but they make it up in profitability in terms of volume. And it's a pretty obvious play, right? But they lost it, more than a decade ago. And Walmart just recently followed suit with Walmart Plus. Why couldn't Walmart do it? Because
Yeah.
Amazon has a dramatic cost advantage in the last mile of delivery to deliver to customers at home, whereas Walmart had built its entire, supply chain to have radically lower costs of suppliers coming in and dropping stuff inside the store, right? So Walmart wasn't good at shipping to customers. Nobody was. So Amazon had this dramatic cost advantage, still does. So it was almost impossible for anybody else to copy it. So this is actually the best loyalty program ever invented, right? We lock you in, you prepay for the privilege of buying from us,
Yeah.
and then you'll never look at the competitor. And we have a cost advantage on delivery. So anyway, so the book talks about this, like how do you figure out what customers you should work on to increase your customer lifetime value? How do you measure the customer lifetime value of an existing customer? And then how do you increase the customer lifetime value of your 70 to 90% decile customers? And there's a lot of things that we know about this, a lot of science around this, and there's lots of examples in the book. Um, I'll go through another like 10 minutes or so, and we'll have a lot of time for Q&A. We'll have a good 20 minutes for Q&A. Then I'm going to share a couple of things that are non-obvious. So this is another retail example. I'm using retail examples. This is true in almost every industry, but retail is really easy to understand. So that's why I just use a lot of retail examples. But the book has examples across tons of industries. So this is Amazon, right? If you go to Amazon and you see like on the top right, it says, hello, sign in. Like I'm not signed in. I'm an anonymous user. I'm not signed in. And I'm typing in MI, and the search engine is showing me these results, microfiber cleaning cloth, and so on and so forth, right? And then if I stay on Amazon for a while and I start looking at things, Amazon will learn from my behavior in real time what I'm looking for. So 10 minutes later, if I look for MI again, it will completely change and it will focus on what I'm looking for and personalize it for me. So will
Hmm.
the rest of Amazon's website. All the site will change in real time. I'm not even logged in. They don't know who I am, but because of what I'm clicking on, what I'm looking at, the site will be personalized exactly for me. So every single customer, even if they're anonymous, gets a unique personalized experience focusing on the exact goods they want, not, the average good that everybody else wants, right? But if you look at, the competitor, I just picked Staples here, but this could be almost anybody because 95% of e-commerce companies do it the same way. I type in MI, I see this, I spend 20 minutes on the site. I really declare I don't want a micro SD card or Microsoft Office. I'm looking for other things, but I search again and I see this. And
Hmm.
so the site isn't personalized at all. Like there's nothing about it that's so how does a site show me? Like how does it decide what to show me? What products it shows me? It's showing the same product to everybody, right? So it just basically shows me the most popular products, the products that people click on the most. But there's a massive problem with that. Problem number one is everybody sees the same products, right? If I'm searching for something and it shows me a list of 500 products, I'm never going to go down to product 65 or 75 or 100, right? I'm only going to see the first 50. So the other 450 products will never be shown. So they're going to have to go on sale at some point because they'll never sell. And then the top 50 products, right, they're the same for everybody. These are the products people click on the most. And typically people click on things because they're on sale. So the search engine will show me products that are on sale only. And then the other products that are not on sale don't get shown and will eventually have to go on sale. And now you've explained why e-commerce makes no money because of the way the product is designed, right? And so this actually doesn't seem like a board level issue, but if you actually start to really understand e-commerce, this one mistake kills the margin of the business forever, right? And so like looking at the customer experience and seeing how it's designed can actually dramatically impact what's happening from a product perspective.
Hmm.
And then last example, and this is, when having the wrong metrics can change an industry. So if you followed SpaceX, right, Boeing, and it had, a stranglehold on satellite launches, and forever Boeing was a cost plus provider of the U.S. government, right, and other satellites. And so they would, do a deal with the government and launch a certain research satellite or some other type of satellite. And Boeing would count the costs and the government would pay, 20, 25% more. And the margin was always 25%, basically incentivizing Boeing to make the cost as high as possible because the higher the costs are, the more cash you're going to make. SpaceX comes in and guarantees a fixed cost launch, right? So, hey, we're going to charge you $125 million, whatever happens, and we take the risk on the cost side. Well, if that's the case, then you start caring a lot about the cost per ton, right, of payload, and you start working very hard on it. And then this happens, right? So this is the cost of payload from 1960 to 2025, and it used to be $25,000 forever, right? Until Falcon 9 brought it down to 3,000, Falcon 9 Heavy, we're down to 1,600, and now we don't know, but Starship isn't working yet, but the estimate is that it'll be $200 per ton, per kilogram, sorry, to launch something into space. And Boeing hasn't made that much progress. So you can just imagine why this happened, which is now SpaceX has 80% of all the payload worldwide, and actually now in the last few months they have 90%.
Whoa.
Right. And so just kind of thinking about metrics and how to really optimize that, can really change the company, can really change an industry. And so I hope in the last 25 minutes I've convinced you that, 90%
Wow.
of companies are very busy improving the wrong things. And so what is the right thing? How do I think about, how to really, and this is true for almost any company. It's not that complicated, right? If you were kind of to think about what, a board should focus on in terms of questions, in terms of metrics, two things come to mind.
Is it busy?
But can we improve the customer lifetime value, right? The forecast of all the future cash flows coming from customers, new and existing, while at the same time improving how customers feel about us. If you can do those two things at the same time and they're not contradicting each other, you've got a really important flywheel of growth. right? But most companies, I mean, we don't talk very often about customer lifetime value in board meetings. We talked about financial metrics, but customer lifetime value is a forward-looking metric as opposed to, the financial metrics are backward-looking metrics, and the operating metrics are kind of just looking at today. But
Mm,
CLV gives you a sense of what's about to happen in the next 5 years. It's really, really powerful. And so if your goal is to acquire, is to increase the customer lifetime value cash flow inside your business, the number one lever is acquire the most profitable customers. Again, fewer than 1% of companies do this. The second lever is, okay, I already have customers. What is the best way to increase the CLV of these customers? Again, while also improving their net promoter score. I'm not trying to gouge the customer. I'm trying to delight the customer. But I do want their CLV to go up. And then, how do I improve my customer experience? Not for the average customer, right? I'm not designing a website to improve, how the average customer feels. The average customer is probably not that profitable. I'm really designing, this website for the, top 30% of my customers. And typically, by the way, the customer experience they want is very, very different than what the average customer experience
mm.
is.
That's
And to me,
interesting.
like that's a really interesting way to think about a business. And
Yeah.
so, what does that mean for a board, right? I think as board members, we clearly have governance, right? Professor Beatty has been at the forefront of this for his entire career. We have strategy. Um, I think it is a board level issue, and not. I don't think it's meddling inside management's, sandbox. But I do think having more often, more frequent conversations around metrics. Like, what are we measuring and why? Do we
Yeah.
know, like, who are the top customers? How much money do we make from the top customers? What do they look like? What are the metrics that we measure? I think is a really rich conversation. And so I do a lot of this. I do a lot of consulting for companies on this stuff, and I go through a whole process. And almost every time that I advise a company, I only advise 5 companies a year, by the way. We always find 3 to 5 like very big things that, in hindsight, seem obvious, but in foresight were not happening. And so I'll just leave you with this before going to the Q&A, which is happy to talk to you, right? Happy to talk to the board, happy to talk management team about these ideas for free. I'm not charging anything in Canada. I charge in the US, but I'm happy to come and give second a version of this presentation. I'm just going to ask that you buy a few books if you can. But if you think this is interesting and you'd like to kind of start thinking this way a little more, happy to talk to you. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and delighted to have that conversation. So with that, if there's,
Wow.
David, if you have any Q&A or if anybody else has any questions,
Yeah.
but that's be a Sequoia, not a bonsai.
Wow. Well done, Nick. Jeez. And the numbers really are staggering. Like I've read the book. I know you. And just the numbers of companies that get this right is so infinitesimal. And they're the ones who actually came to learn from you. So imagine those that didn't even bother to get on a plane and come to see you. Wow.
Yeah, these are the top companies in the world, right? The top,
Yeah.
1,000 companies in the world, and only, I mean, I can count on one hand enough companies who do, like, there's 7 growth principles in the book, and I
Yeah.
can count on one hand, and I only shared 3 today. There's 4 more. I can count on one hand the number of companies who do all 7. And
Wow.
they're untouchable. They just
Yeah.
keep winning and winning and winning.
Yeah. So once you get started on this road, it really is a road to continuous profitability and differentiation that's harder and harder and harder to replicate if you're a competitor, if you're not number one.
Yeah,
Whoa.
like the sequoia, the sequoias are interesting trees, right? They're the largest living things on Earth. They live to 3,000 years. And they're the tallest trees in the forest. And what's not well understood is that they grow faster as they get older because they get more light, above the canopy. So yeah, and this is what we're seeing, by the way. We're seeing like the top companies in the world distancing themselves from the
Yeah.
average at an
Yeah.
accelerating rate.
Yeah. Okay, Quinn, what questions have we got?
David, before I jump in, there's some great questions in here. Do you have any opinion or anything to share from the board perspective on this?
Well, I think Nick and I have talked about this a lot. Is it meddling to think about metrics? And I think that's the role of the chair to read this book, to listen to Nick, and to come back and say, this is one of the things I've got to get on our agendas. It's foresight writ large. And I always promote boards investing more time in foresight than in hindsight and oversight. So in that sense, it fits nicely into the pattern. But I think, Nick, it would be jarring in a number of board situations, right? To be talking about how does marketing actually, maximize its view of its world. Doesn't that, it seems a
Yeah,
little
and
messy.
the book's not a marketing book, right? I use marketing as an example because it's the canary in the coal mine. If the marketing team doesn't do this,
Yeah.
the odds of the other teams doing it are very low. And so it's a cross-company conversation, and I think the easiest way to start it at the board level is to start with this concept of profit density, right? I mean, I think unfortunately the boards I'm on, we talk about customers a lot, but it hasn't always been my experience. We historically I spent a lot more time on financial metrics than customer metrics. So
Yeah.
asking the question like, hey, look, do we have a sense for our profit density, right? What profits do the top 20% customers generate today? And if, and for some companies it doesn't matter, right? Because it's like it's not that concentrated. But for most companies, once the board realizes, and sometimes management doesn't know, that the top 20% customers drive 100% of profits, it changes the entire strategy.
Yeah, you're right.
It's the strategy game changer. So I think it's not a meddling question. I think it's a fundamental question that is certainly a board level question.
Yeah.
When we
Okay,
did the
Quinn.
prep when we did the prep call, we talked about the definition of growth, which I think is really important because you're in the valley and growth isn't necessarily around marketing growth. And so, can you maybe share? You called it sustainable strategic lifetime value. Can you uh, talk more about this definition for directors that might not have this understanding of what growth is?
Yeah, the top companies in the world can do two things that most companies don't do. They can predict the cash flows, a customer lifetime value, right? The cash flows that will be generated from a brand new customer. So today, when you become a customer, I can do your discounted cash flow over the next 10 years, and I know you're worth $5,000 to me. So that's point one, right? So I know that. They can also forecast the customer lifetime value of an existing customer. Hey, David, you've been a customer for 3 years. I see your pattern of using our services, right, or buying our products. And because of that, I can predict that you're going to be worth $3,000 to me in the next 10 years, right? And so those two things come in, and so you can see like the profitability or in the long run of these customers. And then you can test ways to increase that, right? And so if I can forecast David's customer lifetime value, today David is worth $3,000. Let me just do a whole bunch of stuff to David, right? Let me give him an offer. Let me see if I can get him to buy across a different category. If he's in a streaming service and he's been only watching romantic comedies, which I think David, you're prone to do, right? Then if I can get him to watch, a horror movie or an action movie, maybe he's going to stick around longer. Because if he only watches romantic comedies, maybe he's going to churn, 6 months from now because he's out of romantic comedies. So I should give David an idea of like, hey, you should be watching things that are not just romantic comedies. So there's always thousands and thousands of ideas for how to improve the profitability or the customer lifetime value of an existing customer. The trick, and this is the last chapter in the book, we haven't talked about this yet, but the trick is uh, generating ideas isn't that hard. Most companies have hundreds of ideas on hey, look, this email, this offer, this loyalty program, this, that, and the other thing are going to be helpful. They just don't have any velocity of testing. They can't test fast enough. So the idea is to stay on the shelf all the time. The top companies in the world have an extraordinary ability to do hundreds of thousands of tests a year. And if you have that ability, it's like I'll share an example. Like imagine you have a central team whose full-time job, right? It's a cross-functional team. Their full-time job is to devise new ideas to improve the customer lifetime value of different segments of customers, right? Here's a bunch of men who've never done this. Here's a bunch of women who've never done this. Here's a bunch of city dwellers who've never done this. Like here's a bunch of hypotheses based on different segments of customers. And eventually, by the way, it's not even segments. It's groups of one, right? Here's an AI system that we're building to like send, some suggestions to every single individual customer. But as a central team, that team is, get a spreadsheet that has hundreds of ideas and they can test hundreds of ideas a day. And so I was working with a company that was doing this, and the central team started running out of ideas. They were just going so fast that there's like, we have no more hypotheses. So they went and talked to the CEO, and the CEO says, okay, well, let's open up the spreadsheet to the entire company. And they started a contest. And so the CEO started donating $15,000 prizes, three prizes every month. to employees in the company who had the best testing idea, and the prizes were given in a monthly meeting, and they were given before the ideas were tested. It didn't matter if the idea was working or not, but it was like, how clever is the idea? Would it delight customers? Would it improve our economics? Yes or no? And so here's a $15,000 prize. And so you can imagine if your CEO is donating $45,000 a month, and you get a trophy, right? And it's the all hands. What started to happen, which is the entire firm, the entire company, like was going to the spreadsheet with ideas. So the entire
Yeah.
company was thinking about how to get better. And now this company does 25 times more tests than they were doing just
Wow.
a few years ago. And so you think long-term profit, have hypotheses to improve long-term profits, and test really fast is the best way to figure this out.
And maybe build the capacity inside culturally. I know Yamazaki Baking is the most innovative baking company in the world, and I asked Nobuhiro Ijima, the founder and CEO, I said, you're so compartmentalized. When I came into your company, everybody was in the same uniform. They all stood up. They all bowed to you. How do you get to be innovative in a culture like that? And he said,
Yeah.
well, our job is to guarantee the lifetime employment of every employee, and their job is to suggest new ideas. So we have a completely independent testing department, and we give an award for the best new baking idea every month. Sort of institutionalize the same thing in a different business, but by isolating the testing process and by encouraging everybody to get involved in it. That's a very interesting
Yeah.
notion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a bunch of cool questions in the
yeah,
chat.
Yeah.
Nick, does this work for industrial sectors? The answer is yes, right? And so worked with a number of industrial companies who are doing similar things. For some, it doesn't, right? For some, like they have very similar profitability profiles for their, bulk of their customers. There's no profit density. And so, but, if you do have customers that are much more profitable than others, same thing applies, right? How do I find more of these customers? It doesn't have to be digital marketing, by the way. It can be a whole slew of other tactics, but you need to understand who your most profitable customers are. You need to understand after that, how to get more of them and have a dedicated strategy to do that. And then on the, lifetime value improvement side, same thing, right? It, you can do some detective work and figure out, look, here's one of our top, 10% customers, but they were only top 50% 2 years ago. What journey have we been on with this customer to go from top 50% to top 10%? And can we replicate that journey with everybody else? Right. So it's this kind of putting the angle on the customer first and knowing the profitability of each customer, and then asking the right questions to determine how we find more of these very profitable customers, and then what have we done historically, or what can we do proactively going forward to take customers that are good already, they're not bad customers, but they're not top 10%. Like, what do we learn from our best customers we can apply to the top, 70, the 70th decile up and above? Same exact thing happens in industrial companies. Where it doesn't work, it's just you do this analysis of profitability and you find out Nick's completely wrong. Our profits are like the top 20% customers only represent 25% of our profits. Therefore, this whole idea doesn't really make that much sense. But again, it's a very rare company that has this kind of you know customer profile.
Okay.
Um,
What are the questions you now need to ask of the executive from the perspective of a director?
Yeah, yeah, I think starting with just the word customer all the time, right? At every single meeting, I'm a pest on board meetings, right? In a good way. It's like I only need two words. Like, it's like Nick is like, what are we doing with AI? What's the AI thing? What's the AI strategy? AI,
yeah,
AI, AI, right? So that I'm a pest on that, and then I'm a pest on like, hey, look, what do our customers want, but not on average. Like, if we analyze our top 10% customers, do we know how much value they bring to us? And then what delights them? And then what can we do to others? And so like this whole conversation around customer discovery, I think is really interesting. And then secondarily, the conversation around customer experience in Canada in particular, many companies are quite far behind in their customer experience in terms of the digital and AI experience for customers. And so as you're thinking about developing that, right? And again, this is not, I think, a management issue so much as a strategic issue. Yes, we're going to build a better website. Yes, we're going to build a better app. Yes, we're going to use AI. But our strategy should be centered around the top 30% customers, not the average. So having that conversation, like going away from like the customer, like let's talk about the customer. There's no such thing as the average customer. There's a multiplicity of customers, and understanding what the top 30%, eat for breakfast and what they want in great detail and scaling that up is a really interesting conversation. And you'll find most often that management doesn't know. Like they don't know the profit density of the company. They don't know who the top customers are. And when they start looking at it, like unbelievable insights come out of these analysis, right? And then it changes the face of the entire board conversation. So customer, 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 right? And then customer experience, customer experience, customer experience.
Mm.
Were there any Canadian companies that were highlighted in your book that are Sequoias?
Yeah, I mean, the
Shopify.
well, Shopify, yeah,
Shopify. Yeah.
Shopify, what Shopify is done. So Luc Levesque, who was the head of growth for Shopify,
Yeah.
is quoted in my book. And so they built an amazing growth team. They did, a lot of this at Shopify in terms of acquiring more merchants, but not just the average merchant, really focusing on the quality of the merchants they're acquiring, and then developing new systems, new tools constantly to increase the customer lifetime value, right? I mean, you start with like, here's a bunch of web development tools. Now here's a payment platform. Now here's a marketing platform. Here's an analytical platform. So Shopify has acquired very profitable merchants, and then every single month finds ways to continuously increase the profitability of each merchant by delighting them and giving them new tools to be more successful. So yes, it's a great example of a Sequoia in Canada. The car insurance example I use, I can't name the company, but is Canadian and did again quadruple the profits in the last couple of years. And so there's quite a few examples in Canada as well. But again, look, again, only I can count on one hand and the number of companies who are true Sequoias who do all these seven things, right? Despite the fact that it's not that hard. It's just a very different way. Like the reason, by the way, most companies don't do this, like we haven't talked about this yet, it's not intellectually difficult. When you read the book, you'd be like, I get it, I get it, I get it, I get it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Um, well, yeah, so why isn't every company acquiring the best customers, right?
Yeah.
It's because 99% of companies are not comfortable making decisions today based on future forecasts. So like, hey, I just acquired David Beatty. I think he's worth $5,000 in the next 10 years, but I don't know. So am I willing to invest $500 to acquire him because he's only going to make me $300 today? So I'm going to lose $200 today, but I'm going to make it, in the long run. And so having that conversation between, the CMO, the CFO, the CEO, is a very interesting conversation. So it turns out most executives are just much more comfortable. Like, hey, today we acquired David. He bought $300. We paid $100 for David. We're good. Well, what if David never comes back ever again, as opposed to Quinn is going to come back 100 times, right? So that's the crux of the issue is we've been trained to focus on certainty and metrics that are certain, and only certain companies are comfortable building a crystal ball about the future that is not perfect. It's not 100% perfect, but it's 75% perfect. And they're using this crystal ball, and nobody else is building the crystal ball, and they can predict the future, and they're just kicking everybody else's butt because they can predict the future. And nobody is willing to look at their crystal ball because they don't trust it 100%. And it's a devastating mistake because if you have a crystal ball that's 75% accurate and nobody else is using a crystal ball, you're just gonna massively outperform. So that's the crux of the issues. We're just too timid to make decisions based on imperfect data.
I have
Wow.
one more question, then we'll get into the wrap up. There's some very specific questions that are quite good. Please make sure you check out the feedback email and the post event email, and you might be able to get in touch with Nick to get your questions answered. But Nick, combining a question here, David talks about short-termism, that short-termism is a huge issue for directors. And you're talking about sustainable lifetime value when it comes to profitability. And this last question is talking about bonsai thinking. So small scale thinking. I see that grouped with short term thinking. Why does this happen? And how do you actually enact the change to make
Yeah.
businesses have these long term metrics?
Yeah, I think, not even just short term, right? Most companies in the short term are actually don't maximize profits. right? And so just asking that question, say, hey, look, what's your KPI in marketing? What's your KPI in product development? What's your KPI in customer service, right? And in realizing that none of these are anywhere about maximizing profitable growth in the short term. Step one. Step two is like, okay, well, once we've done that and profits are going up in the short term, let's now maximize medium-term profits. And let's build this crystal ball and think about the 5-year picture here. And so I think the most important thing for directors to begin the conversation is just like hey, like show me the core metrics for each major department and how those lead to maximizing profitability. And having that conversation, and then after that, 6 months later, once profits have gone up, it's like, hey, like how's our profit concentration around customers? Can we predict the profit of customers in the future? Can we now maximize longer term profits? But I think just maximizing short term profits is a really big opportunity for most companies because they don't. 90% don't.
Excellent. Just starting the wrap up. Any final words, David?
No, I'm thrilled, Nick. Thank you so very much. The metric still shakes me to the core. What were you doing in McKinsey? What are they doing? What about
Hey,
Bain,
look, like
Accenture,
I'm
KPMG,
not I'm not making fun of
Deloitte?
companies, by the way. I started 4 companies myself. I didn't do
Yeah.
any of the stuff in my companies. I didn't know this stuff, right? So I'm as guilty. Actually, the book is like full of examples of me being a dunce and making huge mistakes.
Yeah.
So if I'd had this book, when I was an entrepreneur, I would be in a, I would have been much more successful than I was.
So,
Okay.
short commercial here. We'll be sending this recording out within the next 24 hours. There will be a feedback form. If you would like to be included for a giveaway for the book, please fill in that feedback form for Nick. There will also be an opportunity if you'd like to have Nick talk to your board. He's looking for opportunity to circulate his book and to help out Canadian boards or boards all over. So thank you very much, Nick. This has been a part of our board chair series. We
Yeah.
just had Katie Taylor in January, if you haven't seen that recording. And next month in March, we are having Francois Bertrand. So the focus of this conversation will be about the nuances between having government and public institution governance and board management versus private governance and the nuance between that. So Francois has been a great contributor, has worked with David for a very long time, and she's very well respected in the world of corporate governance. So thank you very much, and thank you, Nick.
Buy the book. Buy the book. That's got to be the last word here. Buy the
And
book.
buy the
It'll change
book.
your life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time. Cheers.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye.